morning. May I have your attention, please? I'm Specialist Carwile, and today we're going to be going over leadership styles. The classification for this brief is unclassified. So today we're going to be going over the definition of a leader, the different styles of leadership, pros and cons of each, examples of leaders that demonstrate these styles, followership and the different types of followers, and then at the end we're going to do a summary. If you have any questions, please hold them into the end. Okay, so what is a leader? A leader is a person who leads or commands a group, organization, or country. When I think of a leader, I think of a person that is in charge, that motivates others toward a common goal. The leader tends to get most of the recognition for success or failure towards the goal in its team or unit. So there are many different types of leaders, but in the Army we emphasize 5 different types. Those are transactional leaders, transformational leaders, servant leaders, autocratic leaders, and then we emphasize followership. So first thing we're going to go over is transactional leadership. Transactional leaders tend to have a lot of structure in their leadership. They stress performance, and they have a punishment and reward system. An example of this is if your company or your unit meets your quota for something, maybe you get an extra day off, or you get a 59-minute rule, something along those lines. A pro for this is there's a clear leadership structure, and then a con is morale is usually a little bit lower. And then examples of people who follow this type of leadership is Bill Gates, Howard Schultz, and for the football fans out there, Vince Lombardi. And then if you look over to the image I have up here, in this type of leadership, there's not as much trust for the subordinates, so the teams are closely monitored and very much in control by the leader. And then the leaders definitely want teams that obey pretty much everything they say. And as I mentioned before, the sense of motivation they have is the reward or punishment system. The next type of leadership we're going to be going over is transformational leaders. So typically this is compared to transactional leaders. It's pretty much on the opposite end of the spectrum. They have a lot of trust for their subordinates, and they let them make their own decisions and help contribute to the company themselves. Morale tends to be a lot higher because there's a lot more creativity. They get to kind of express themselves instead of just the leader telling them what to do. They also are given their credit that's due for when they have success. Richard Branson, who is the owner of the Virgin Atlantic Group, he is a good example of a transformational leader. As I mentioned before, a pro, there's a lot more creativity, and there's also a lot more development for the subordinates. They get to kind of find their way in the company. A con, though, leadership can sometimes be kind of unclear because there's so many people wanting to be chiefs and not enough people wanting to follow them. The next type of leadership we're going to be going over is a servant leader. So servant leaders, it's the philosophy that the main goal is to serve his or her subordinates. He wants to make sure the needs and wants of the subordinates are met before him or her own. This philosophy was made up by Robert K. Greenleaf, and then one of the best examples I can think of is Abraham Lincoln. He made the tough decisions during the Civil War, even if it may not seem like the best or the easiest for the time. He went against a lot of people and made the decision that helped contribute to this country the most. And then a con to this is sometimes the subordinates want to take advantage of these leaders. So seeing that, they might view them as weak. And then a pro is the morale usually is a lot higher, and things get done a lot more efficient because your workers or subordinates are taken care of. The next type of leadership is autocratic. It's also known as authoritarian leadership. When I think of this, I think of a dictator. Individual control is definitely stressed in this. What they say goes. Adolf Hitler is a prime example for this. During World War II, he he made all the decisions. What he said went, and everyone else just followed. There is a pro to this, however. Tough decisions can be made a lot easier and in a timely manner, because instead of having to go through a group process of making the right decision, it's just one person making the decision, and they get that decision made and over with. There's also a clear and precise chain of command. You know exactly who's in charge, and you know who to go to. A con for this, though, is resentment tends to be an issue. People tend to not like being controlled. And then the morale obviously is low due to the resentment. Next thing we're going to be going over is followership. So followership is the capacity or willingness to follow a leader. This is where all the heavy lifting is, and this is what's filled with subordinates. There's 5 different types of followers: alienated, effective, sheep, yes people, and survivors. Alienated and effective followers are considered critical thinkers, while sheep and yes people are not. And then at some point in anyone's career, especially in the military, you've been considered a survivor. So I'm going to go over this image I have up here. So an alienated follower is an independent thinker, independent and think critically, but they are passive. So they like to distance themselves from the leadership. When I think of this, I think of somebody that just doesn't have much trust for their team. The next type of follower is sheep people. So these are passive, and they're also dependent. So they don't like to think critically, and they don't like to express their own opinion, but they do typically follow the leader and fall in line. The next is yes people. So these are active people. They get the job done, but like the sheep people, they just follow orders. They don't really want to do any more or any less, just get the job done, pretty much get home. That's the way I think of it. And then the next one's where you want to be, an effective follower. So effective followers are proactive. They're not afraid to give out their opinions and what's the best way to get the job done. They do think critically, and they tend to be a lot more respectful than the others towards their leadership. And then last but not least is the survivors. So survivors, they like to go with the flow and follow the path of least resistance. When I think of a survivor, I think of that specialist that's about to PCS and just finished out processing about a day early, and he kind of makes his appearances at work the last day, but he don't really stick around to get any kind of orders or anything like that. He just kind of makes his appearances and disappears for the rest of the day. So in conclusion, today we covered the definition of a leader. We covered the different leadership styles. We also went over benefits and drawbacks of each type of leader. We also went over examples of famous individuals that led or still lead today. And then we also went over the definition of followership and different types of followers. Is there any questions? Specialist Larson.
If you can pick any type of leadership, what would it be and why?
So if I was going to pick my own personal opinion, I would say a servant leader. It would be what I would look up to being, because this type of leader, I feel like as a young E5, that's your main goal, is making sure your new soldiers and soldiers assigned to you are well taken care of. Is there any other questions? Okay, well, I have a question for you. First question is, what leadership style did Abraham Lincoln fall under? Specialist Lawson.
Abraham Lincoln fell under the servant leadership.
That is correct. Abraham Lincoln did fall under servant leadership. And then the next question is, what were the different types of followers? Specialist Larson.
There were alienated, sheep, yes people, survivors, and effective leaders.
That is correct. And if there's no other questions at this time, and if anyone would also like a copy of this slide deck, you can just get with me after the briefing. Dismissed.